This is my second segment on the question of the Rebbe and Limudei Chol. What is the Rebbe's view regarding secular studies? The answer to that question, without going any further, is that it's a tool. It's never a self-identity. A Jew's identity is Torah. When a person studies secular knowledge, and he enjoys it more than he enjoys Gemara and Chassidus and Halacha and Tanakh, and he intellectually defines himself by it to the Rebbe, that's a Chilul Hashem. Now that may be a little bit of a strong expression, but it's not a very strong, not too strong an expression. Because the Rebbe is a Chassidic Rebbe who teaches Chassidic values, and the Chassidic values are Torah Tmima. The Chassidic values are not Torah im derech eretz, and they're certainly not Torah umada. We don't have a philosophy of what's called open-mindedness, where a part of being an intellectual is learning anything but Torah. Secular studies are taught and learned as a kadam lachtechba, as a tool to make a parnasa. And that's the attitude that we have towards them, and that's the way we invest in them. And as parents, we have to create an environment in our home where that value is communicated. In other words, if we personally value chochmas chitzonius, secular studies, intellectually, in the kind of way that we communicate to our children that this is a priority, they're going to value it as well. And it's not a Hasidic value. It's not a Hasidic value. It's a secular value. It's a worldly value. And in the modern Orthodox philosophy holds that it's a priority. They hold that it's a part of being a Yid. But this is Chassidus. And Chassidus disagrees with that categorically. Secular studies are a means to an end. They're never a self-definition. I met a man many years ago who was a doctor in an emergency room, which makes him a very good doctor because he's on his feet and he has to constantly think creatively, as emergency room doctors need to be. And he said to me, I practice medicine, but I'm not a doctor. So I said to him, what do you mean you didn't go to medical school? He said, no, I went to medical school and I graduated, but I don't consider it an honorable profession. Learning Daf Yomi, I consider honorable. Practicing medicine is what I do. Now, having said that, I want to qualify that a little bit. We're parents and we have children. It's our duty as parents and as Hasidim to create a direction for our children to go in and to show them, by example mostly, but also by what we tell them, what philosophy of life you want them to pursue, which is a Hasidic philosophy of life. If our children show an interest in Chochmas Chitzenius, of course, depends on the field. Some fields of Chochmas Chitzenius are not allowed to be studied because they're kfira, particularly when it deals with Avodah Zarah directly. Like comparative religion is probably the worst thing a boy or girl should study, specifically when they're studying what they call Bible criticism, but actually criticizing Torah. It's the worst. If you have a child that's interested in mathematics or physics and chemistry by themselves, or history, you have to be very careful about shutting them down. Meaning, as much as I'm saying that the Rebbe's attitude towards secular studies is that we don't define ourselves by it. We define ourselves only by Torah, only by Chassidus. The Jewish people are defined by the Torah. It says in Gemara and it's brought in Halacha that if a person has completed the whole Torah, and he says, now that I've studied the whole Torah, I want to go study other Chochmas, the Torah says you're not allowed to do it. This is brought in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Hilchas Talmud Torah. A Jew's whole identity is Torah. That's the philosophy of Chassidus. That is the philosophy of Chassidus. The philosophy of Torah is the philosophy of Chassidus, and the philosophy of the Rebbe. But if a child shows an acute interest, you have to be careful about saying no. In other words, you must appreciate the idea that Chochmas Chitzenius, by and large, although not entirely, is klipas noiga. It's not a sin. And if children show an interest, it's not necessarily correct to absolutely shut them down and stop them and not allow them. Of all the things a child can get into, which is, quote, wrong, is the least of the wrongs. But we as parents who are communicating to our children the Rebbe's values is that Chochmas Chitzenius is klipa, and you study it because you need it when you need it. And as it says in Tanya chapter 8, that Chochmas Chitzenius Metama HaMoyach, it contaminates the mind, which in a way is worse than what's Metames HaLev, that contaminates the heart. As we see, in fact, sometimes a child gets involved in Chochmas Chitzenius, and he gets so enthralled with it that it takes over his gishmak, takes over his joy in Torah, and that would be a calamity, that would be a terrible thing. But if the child shows an interest in those studies, I think you have to be very careful about stopping them, because it's not an Aveda, and sometimes stopping them will turn out to be a huge Aveda. But as parents, the values we communicate to our children, the Rebbe's values, is that Chochmah Chitzenius, secular studies, is never an end in itself, it's a means to an end. The only thing we study that's an end in itself is Torah. In the early 60s, there's actually a sikha, you can audio tape, or you can hear the Rebbe talking about it, that Yeshiva University, YU, honored some of their students who had won a Shakespeare competition. I think it was a national competition, and some of the students in Yeshiva University did very, very well in that competition in literature. And of course, Yeshiva University has the philosophy of Torah Mada, Torah and other knowledge, which is not the Hasidic philosophy. And the Rebbe really went off, protesting, how come when a person finishes Shas or finishes a Masechta, we don't make such a big deal out of him. When a person wins an award for Shakespeare, we make such a big deal. And the Rebbe was talking to YU. He was talking to a culture and a philosophy that's not a Hasidic culture and a philosophy that principally believes in Torah Mada, and he was protesting the fact that they gave primacy to Shakespeare over Torah. In our culture and in our philosophy, which means the Rebbe's Torah and the Rebbe's philosophy, secular subject is a mean to an end. Period.